It had been raining for 3 days straight. Not the kind of rain that rushed in with thunder and drama, but the soft, steady kind that made you stop and listen. The kind that whispered over rooftops, lingered in tree branches, and made puddles in places you didn't expect. Evelyn sat by her window again. Same blanket, same tea, same thoughts. She didn't know what she was waiting for, just that something in her spirit was stretching, aching, like the silence had started to speak, and she couldn't unhear it. Evelyn had always been strong. At least, that's what people told her. She was the encourager, the fixer, the one who prayed for others even when she didn't know how to pray for herself. But lately, everything felt still. Not dead, not hopeless, just still. Like standing in a hallway between two doors. The one behind her was shut. The one in front wasn't open yet. And so she waited, not knowing what was on the other side, only that she couldn't go back. The quiet felt heavier than usual that morning. Her phone had been unusually silent. No texts, no calls, no plans. Evelyn wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered under her breath, "God, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm here." The air didn't reply, but the stillness deepened, and strangely, that was an answer. Far away, on the other side of town, a man named Caleb stood in front of a church with the same weight in his chest. He hadn't been to this place in years, not since his brother's funeral, but something had pulled him there today, a voice, a nudge, something soft and persistent. He didn't know if it was God or just the memory of better days, but his feet kept walking anyway. The rain soaked through his jacket. He didn't care. His hands were cold, but his heart burned with a strange sense of urgency. Something was shifting. Caleb stepped inside the small, quiet chapel. It was empty, just the flicker of candles, the scent of old wood and forgotten prayers, and the creak of pews that hadn't been sat in for a while. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something in him whispered, "Get ready." Back at home, Evelyn's phone lit up. One notification. A daily verse from an app she rarely opened anymore. She didn't recognize the verse, but her eyes locked on the words as if they'd been written just for her. "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. Tears welled in her eyes. Not because of the verse, but because of what she felt beneath it. A presence, a nudge, a whisper she couldn't explain. She set the phone down, placed her hand over her heart, and said softly, "Okay, I'll wait, but please, don't let me miss what's next." For the next few days, Evelyn noticed small changes. The barista remembered her name. A stranger smiled at her in the rain. She woke up before her alarm, rested and alert. A butterfly landed on her arm while she was watering her plants, and didn't leave for almost a minute. None of these moments were spectacular, but they weren't accidents either. They were threads, unseen, quiet, gentle, and somehow they all tugged at the same place in her spirit. God was preparing something. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in his apartment, flipping through an old notebook. It was from years ago, prayers he had written, dreams he had buried, and names he had long forgotten. One name stopped him cold. Eve. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't know anyone named Eve. But there it was, scribbled in the corner of a page, underlined twice. His heart pounded. Was it a name? A metaphor? A coincidence? He didn't know, but suddenly he couldn't stop thinking about her. Or rather, about someone. Someone he hadn't met yet, but somehow already missed. The days blurred, but in the stillness, both Evelyn and Caleb began to change. She started praying again, not asking, just talking. He started listening, not to the world, but to the stirrings inside his soul. She cleaned out her closet, not knowing why. He canceled an old relationship that never felt right. She journaled for the first time in months. He deleted the dating apps that never went deeper than surface talk. They were pruning. They were preparing. But they still hadn't met. Not yet. But the air around them was alive with divine timing. In Evelyn's dreams, she kept seeing a hand reaching for hers, not grabbing, just waiting. In Caleb's quiet moments, he kept hearing the same phrase in his spirit, "When your soul is ready." One afternoon, Evelyn walked into a bookstore she had passed 1,000 times, but never entered. She didn't know why. She just felt drawn. She wandered the aisles, not looking for anything. Her fingers traced book spines, like she was searching for something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. And then, it happened. Caleb was there, standing in the same aisle, reading the back of a book on grace. They both reached for the same title, their fingers brushing, eyes meeting. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't fireworks. It was stillness. A holy kind of calm, like two puzzle pieces realizing they were part of the same picture before they ever spoke a word. He smiled. She smiled back. And somewhere in heaven, God whispered, "Now." Evelyn didn't believe in coincidences, not anymore. There were just too many of them lately. Too many random encounters, accidental messages, unexpected emotions. But what happened in the bookstore didn't feel like coincidence at all. It felt like alignment. The kind you can't force, the kind you don't chase, the kind that quietly taps you on the shoulder and whispers, "This is the beginning." She didn't know his name yet. He hadn't said it. But his eyes were kind, the kind that didn't look through her, but into her. And his voice, when he said, "Sorry, you go ahead," as she reached for the same book, it wasn't just polite, it was warm, like a hallway light left on for someone who hadn't come home in a while. She smiled. "Grace," she said, lifting the book. "Kind of ironic. That's the one I needed." He looked at the title, then back at her. "Yeah, I think I did too." That night, Evelyn lay in bed with the book in her lap, unopened. She hadn't read a single page. She was too busy listening. Not to sounds, not to voices, but to God. Because deep in her chest, something had shifted. She didn't know what Caleb's name was yet, but she already knew what he represented. Change. Not in the world around her, but in her heart. A prayer rose up from somewhere deep inside her. Not a fancy one, just a whisper. "God, if this is from you, help me hold it with open hands." She didn't want to clutch, didn't want to control, didn't want to turn this into something it wasn't. She just wanted to trust. Caleb couldn't sleep either. After the bookstore, he'd walked around the block 3 times, replaying the moment in his head. He didn't even know her name. He didn't ask. That wasn't like him. But somehow it felt complete. Like the moment wasn't supposed to finish. It was supposed to linger. Like a page turned, but the chapter hadn't ended. He sat on the edge of his bed looking at the same book. His phone buzzed. A notification from his Bible app. A verse of the day. He almost ignored it, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe hope, made him read it. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. His breath caught. Was that about her? Was it about him? He wasn't sure, but it didn't feel random.
She turned, but no one was there. Only light, only peace. When she woke, she wrote the dream in her journal. Then, in bold letters underneath, she wrote, "Don't rush the bloom." Caleb, that same night, sat in church for the first time in months. The pastor didn't know him, didn't know his story. But halfway through the message, the pastor stopped, looked out at the crowd, and said, "Some of you are standing right at the edge of what you've been praying for. But God is whispering, 'Don't move ahead of me.' You don't need to make it happen. You just need to stay in position." Caleb bowed his head and smiled through tears. "I hear you, God," he whispered, loud and clear. Love didn't knock on their doors with urgency. It trickled in like a slow rain, soaking deep. God was growing something, and both of them were finally still enough to let it happen. Some moments come and go like a breath. Others linger, not because of what happened, but because of what was felt. That's how it had been lately for Evelyn and Caleb. They weren't officially anything. They weren't dating, they hadn't even exchanged phone numbers yet. But somehow their lives kept brushing up against each other, like threads being pulled from opposite ends of the same fabric. It had been 2 weeks since they met. 2 weeks of small, sacred moments, brief run-ins, quiet conversations, shared smiles that said more than words ever could. They didn't text, they didn't plan, but God seemed to keep scripting their connection like a soft rhythm, one encounter at a time. Evelyn had always believed love came like a wave, loud, fast, obvious. But this came like a breeze, barely there, but undeniable. It didn't knock her over. It called her inward. She could feel it. Something was beginning, but not in the way the world begins things. This beginning didn't need a label. It needed trust. Caleb, too, was sensing the shift. He found himself waking up earlier, spending more time in Scripture, talking to God more often, not because he needed answers, but because he craved closeness. One morning, while journaling, he wrote something unexpected. "I think I'm being prepared to love someone I haven't even begun to know." He stared at the sentence for a long time, and then added beneath it, "Or maybe I already do." At the same time, Evelyn was writing too. In her prayer journal, she confessed what she hadn't said out loud. "God, my heart is stirring, and it scares me. But if this is you, I don't want to run. I want to be ready." She didn't want to fall in love. She wanted to recognize it when God placed it in her path. One Sunday morning, they saw each other again, this time at the grocery store. It was unexpected, like always, and somehow perfect. Evelyn was holding a bag of oranges. Caleb, a bouquet of flowers he'd picked up for a neighbor in the hospital. Their carts collided, literally. They laughed. "You again," she said, half teasing. "I think someone upstairs is orchestrating this," he replied, smiling. "I don't even live on this side of town," she confessed. "Neither do I." And that was all it took. Another thread pulled, another stitch made. They left together, walked to the parking lot side by side. Still no asking for numbers, still no pressure, just presence. Before parting, Caleb turned and said quietly, "Isn't it strange we keep meeting by accident?" Evelyn looked at him and said with a steady softness, "Or maybe we keep walking into the parts of the story that were already written." That night it rained again, and somewhere in the quiet of her apartment, Evelyn stood by the window, watching drops slide down the glass like God's own fingerprints. She whispered, "Lord, I don't know where this is going, but I feel you in it. Keep weaving. I won't interrupt the pattern." Across town, Caleb did something he hadn't done in years. He called his mother. They hadn't spoken much since his brother passed. Grief had created distance, but this night he felt a pull towards healing. They talked for 2 hours, not just about loss, but about life. And toward the end, his mother said something that made him pause. Sometimes we don't meet people by chance. Sometimes we meet them because heaven is trying to restore something inside us. That same night, Evelyn got a text from her sister. A simple line. "I don't know why, but I felt like God told me to remind you you're about to step into something beautiful. Don't second guess it." She didn't reply. She just sat still, letting the message sink in like the rain outside, letting peace take root in places that used to tremble. The next morning, she walked into the bookstore again, not because she wanted to find him, but because she wanted to sit in the same quiet that started it all. She picked up a journal from a wooden shelf. The cover read, "God writes the best love stories in silence." She smiled, then paused, because on the other side of the room, there he was. He looked up, surprised, but not shocked. Like he felt her coming, like the thread had tugged again. She walked over. This time they hugged, not awkward, not forced, familiar, like a memory neither could explain. They sat for a long time that day, talking about everything and nothing, but mostly just being. There was no pressure, no expectations, no strategy, only a steady awareness that something was being written, and neither of them had to pick up the pen. Invisible threads, that's how it works. God doesn't always send signs and lightning and thunder. Sometimes he uses rain, timing, a smile at the right moment, a name you never expected to memorize. Sometimes he doesn't speak in commands, he speaks in nudges. He lets souls bump into each other until hearts begin to remember what heaven already knows. Later that night, Caleb opened his journal again. He flipped to that same page. The sentence still stared back at him. "I think I'm being prepared to love someone I haven't even begun to know." This time he smiled and added just below it, "But maybe I'm starting to." And Evelyn, without knowing why, added a page in her own journal too. We're not building something rushed. We're watching something holy unfold, one thread at a time.
In that moment, Caleb saw her, not as a woman, not as a friend, but as a reflection of God's grace. They were not the same people they were when they met. Just a few weeks earlier, they were strangers with stories. Now, they were mirrors with mercy. One evening, Evelyn sat alone on her porch. It was quiet, except for the sound of distant crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through trees. She whispered a prayer out loud, barely above a breath. "God, is this what you meant when you said you restore in ways we never expect?" No voice replied, no sign appeared, but her soul felt full, not because she had answers, but because she finally had peace. Caleb, that same evening, felt something stirring inside him, not fear,
Not nerves, but awe. He walked into his small home office, opened his laptop, and began typing something he didn't expect to write. To the woman I haven't officially called mine yet. You reflect things I didn't know I carried. You make silence feel holy. You see me in ways I've never shown. And if this is God, then I'll wait forever to call it love, because this kind of love is already calling me. They weren't rushing, they weren't labeling, but their souls were anchoring. And what anchored them wasn't attraction. It wasn't familiarity. It wasn't timing. It was grace. Grace that covered the old wounds. Grace that wrapped around their laughter. Grace that whispered, "You don't need to be perfect to be chosen." One afternoon, Evelyn asked, "Do you ever wonder how different your life would be if we had met earlier?" Caleb paused. "Sometimes I do," he said, "but then I realize maybe I wouldn't have seen you clearly back then." "Why not?" "Because I wasn't ready to recognize someone who reflected what I was still rejecting in myself." She nodded slowly. "I think I get that." Then she said something that made him catch his breath. "God didn't send me to complete you. He sent me to remind you that you were never missing anything in the first place." That's the thing about mirrors. They don't give you anything new. They just reveal what was always there. And sometimes God sends people not to fix us, but to remind us of the beauty we've been too wounded to see. Evelyn and Caleb were beginning to see it now, in each other, in themselves. They were still two whole people, but together they reflected something divine, something steady, something strong, something sacred. And as the days unfolded, the connection deepened, not because they tried harder, but because they let grace do the work. They didn't need to chase each other. They just needed to keep showing up, as they were, as God intended, as mirrors, reflecting heaven one conversation at a time. By now, Evelyn and Caleb had learned to stop asking questions with clocks in them. Why now? Why not earlier? Is this the right time? Because if life had a pattern, it rarely revealed itself early. And when it came to God, timing was never just about the moment. It was always about the maturity behind it. Evelyn used to believe love had an age, a window, a season. She used to think she missed it, like she was 5 years too late for something that should have happened long ago. But sitting across from Caleb now, laughing over coffee, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't, she realized something. Love doesn't care about your timeline. It cares about your readiness. That evening, Caleb got a call from a friend he hadn't spoken to in months. A friend who knew him from his past, the version of him that moved too fast, trusted too quickly, gave too much. "Man," his friend said, "you sound different." "Different how?" Caleb asked. "Like you're standing still and not apologizing for it." Caleb smiled. Maybe for the first time in years, he wasn't racing ahead or dragging someone behind him. He was walking beside someone, and more importantly, walking with God. That weekend, they saw each other again, this time not by coincidence. Caleb had asked him to meet him at the botanical gardens. It was their first intentional outing. No labels, no pressure, just two people saying, "I'd like to see you on purpose this time." Evelyn wore a soft blue dress, the kind you don't plan to impress with, but somehow still leave an imprint. Caleb brought a notebook in his jacket. He didn't plan to read from it, but part of him hoped there'd be a moment where words would find space. They walked through rows of flowers, soft music in the background, kids running, the air gentle with that early spring fragrance. At one point, Evelyn stopped in front of a blooming cherry blossom tree and said quietly, "Funny how something so beautiful can bloom after such a silent winter." Caleb looked at her. "I think we're like that tree." Later, they sat on a bench overlooking the water. There was silence for a few minutes, not awkward silence, sacred silence, the kind that fills a space with more than sound ever could. Then Caleb took out the notebook, flipped to a page, looked down, then back at her. "I wrote this. Before we ever had coffee, before I even knew your name." Evelyn blinked, listening. He read, "There's someone out there whose spirit knows mine. I haven't met her yet, but I feel her prayers like background music in my quietest hours. And when I meet her, I won't rush, because souls like that deserve time to be seen, not just chosen, witnessed." Evelyn didn't speak. Her eyes welled with tears. She didn't need to say anything, because what do you say to something that echoes your own heart? You just feel it. Later that night, Evelyn sat on her bed, reading a psalm. "He has made everything beautiful in its time." Ecclesiastes 3:11. She had read it before, hundreds of times, but tonight it felt personal. Because nothing about her life added up on paper. Not her age, not her career path, not her relationship history. But grace doesn't check resumes, and timing isn't delayed when it's divinely assigned. Meanwhile, Caleb wrote another journal entry. "God, thank you for not answering my prayers when I was impatient. Thank you for ignoring my deadlines. Thank you for not letting me settle for convenience instead of covenant." He paused, then wrote one more line. "I'm not asking for certainty anymore. I'm asking for stewardship. Help me carry this right." Over the next few weeks, things didn't accelerate. They deepened. They began praying together. Nothing formal, just a few words spoken softly at the end of long walks. Caleb would say, "Thank you for today, God." Evelyn would add, "And for this peace that we didn't create ourselves." They still didn't define their relationship. Not yet, because love, they realized, is not a race to a label. It's a garden. And gardens don't bloom by pressure. They bloom by presence. There were moments, of course, when fear crept in. Evelyn would wonder, what if I'm imagining all of this? What if this ends before it begins? Caleb would think, what if I'm not what she needs long term? What if she deserves better than me? But in those moments, they'd look at each other. And it was enough. No speeches, no reassurance, just being seen. That kind of quiet reassurance is what timing can't give you when you're rushing. Only God can orchestrate that. One night, Evelyn and Caleb sat watching a film about missed opportunities, people whose lives just didn't align, even though they were in love. As the credits rolled, Evelyn said softly, "I used to think love was mostly about timing, but maybe it's more about trust. Trusting that even if it takes years, what's meant for you won't pass you." Caleb nodded. Timing doesn't always make sense, but when God's in it, peace shows up before clarity. They both smiled, because that's exactly what this was. It didn't make sense, but it felt right. And out somewhere between unanswered questions and unfolding grace, they learned that when the timing doesn't add up, but the peace still covers everything, you don't need a sign. You just need to keep walking. Because not all miracles come on schedule. Some walk slowly beside you and become love before they become a story.
She stared at the message for a while before replying. "No, just an old fear knocking. I didn't open the door, but I heard it." He didn't reply with cliches. He didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me that. I'll do my best not to give your fears a place to stay." And that healed something in her. Still, the tension lingered, not between them, but around them. Because as peaceful as their journey had been so far, God knew it was time to test the depth of what they'd built. The next week, Caleb got news that rocked his world. A job opportunity. A big one. Across the country. It was everything he had worked for, everything he thought he wanted. But it would mean distance. It would mean disruption. And most of all, it would mean uncertainty. He called Evelyn the night he got the offer. They met at the same bench where it all began. Her face was unreadable, but her heart was pounding. "So, what are you thinking?" she asked. Caleb exhaled. "I'm thinking this is the kind of moment that tells you what matters most." They sat in silence. Then he continued. "Before you, I would have said yes in a heartbeat. But now, I feel like I need to ask God what He's doing, not just what the world is offering." She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "That's all I ask. That we don't rush what's holy for what's shiny." That night, both of them prayed hard, separately, but in sync. Evelyn knelt by her bed and whispered, "God, if this is from you, don't let me hold it too tightly. But if this is just a season, teach me how to let go with grace." Caleb stood at his window, staring at the stars, and said, "God, I'll walk through any door you open, but please don't let me walk away from what you've only just begun." 2 days passed, then 3. No decision. And then the offer was withdrawn. Unexpectedly. No explanation. Just a sudden call from the company saying they were going in a different direction. Caleb was stunned. He had done nothing wrong. He had the experience, he had the favor, but something unseen had closed the door. He knew instantly this was God. Not punishment, not rejection, redirection. He texted Evelyn, "It's off the table, the job, gone," just like that. Her reply was instant. "Then maybe God's table is bigger than the one they offered you." They met that evening. Rain lightly fell from the sky, but neither of them noticed. Because there, under a shared umbrella, they looked at each other with new eyes. Not naive, not idealistic, but anchored. They had been tested, not by drama, but by the choice to wait, to listen, to trust. And through that test, something beautiful happened. Their faith grew. Not just faith in God, but faith in each other. Evelyn said, "I think God didn't kick the job away because it was bad. I think He removed it because it would have made you question what He was building here." Caleb nodded. "And what He's building here isn't just a relationship. It's a foundation." There was no kiss, no dramatic declaration, just two people in the middle of the rain, letting it soak into their skin like grace. That night, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "I don't need a love that avoids every storm. I need a love that sits with me in it," and still says, "We'll get through this." And Caleb wrote in his, "She didn't ask me to stay. She asked me to pray. That's how I knew it was real." Every divine connection will be tested, not to destroy it, but to strengthen it, to teach you the difference between chemistry and covenant. And as they learned to stand still when the world tried to pull them apart, they discovered something sacred. Faith that has been tested is faith that won't collapse. There is a strange moment that happens between two souls that are divinely connected. It's not about attraction. It's not even about familiarity. It's a knowing, a silent, wordless recognition that says, "I've seen you before. Not here, not like this, but somewhere deeper. I've known you." Evelyn felt that more than ever now. It wasn't Caleb's smile, though she loved it. It wasn't his voice, though it steadied her. It wasn't even the way he looked at her like she was a rare constellation. It was something in his spirit. The way his presence didn't just comfort her, it reminded her of who she truly was. One evening they walked by the river. The sun was setting, painting the water with gold and coral hues. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. The silence between them was alive with meaning. As they stopped by a wooden railing, Caleb turned to her and said, "Do you ever feel like some connections happen before you're even born? Like God writes certain people into our story long before we know how to read it?" She smiled softly. "I used to think that was just something people said to sound poetic. But lately, I think I'm starting to believe it. It wasn't that they were falling in love. It's that their souls were remembering. There was a comfort, a deep, unshakable peace that neither of them had ever felt with anyone else." Caleb wasn't the kind of man who opened up easily. But with Evelyn, he found himself sharing pieces of his story he had never spoken out loud. The night his brother died, the way grief had shattered his faith, the quiet nights he sat alone in his car, asking God if he even had a reason to keep going. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty words. She just stood there, holding his hand, tears quietly sliding down her own cheeks. "Sometimes I don't understand why I'm still here," he admitted. "Like maybe I was supposed to break. But someone, kept holding me." "You weren't supposed to break," she said gently. "You were supposed to bend. And God sent people and moments to catch you when you didn't want to be caught." Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and said quietly, "I think you might be one of those moments." The next day, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Not because of what he said, but because of how true it felt. She sat on her balcony that night looking at the stars and whispered, "God, how is it that some hearts recognize each other even before our eyes do?" No answer came, but her chest felt warm, like someone was listening, like someone had always been listening. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened in ways words can't quite capture. They began praying together more intentionally. It wasn't rehearsed. Sometimes it was just a quiet, "God, thank you for this peace." Other times, it was Caleb praying over her when she didn't have the strength to do it. He would hold her hands, close his eyes, and whisper, "Cover her, God. She's been through more than she admits. Remind her she's still chosen, still loved, still worthy of everything good." Every time he prayed like that, something inside Evelyn healed a little more. Love like this wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of love the world posts pictures of to get approval. It was steady, sacred, hidden in prayer but powerful in impact. One night, Caleb had a dream. In it, he was standing in a field of white lilies. He was searching for something, someone. Then across the field, he saw Evelyn walking towards him holding a lantern. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, and the light from the lantern grew brighter until the whole field was glowing. When he woke, his heart was pounding. He didn't tell her the dream immediately, but that day when they met for lunch, she wore a white dress with tiny embroidered flowers on it. And when she smiled, it felt like the dream had followed him into reality. "Do you believe in signs?" he asked her over coffee. She tilted her head, curious. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I think God uses them when words aren't enough." That night, Caleb finally told her the dream. She didn't laugh, didn't call it silly. Instead, she said softly, "Maybe the light wasn't from me. Maybe it was what happens when two souls carrying God's love recognize each other. That kind of light is contagious." For days, Caleb thought about that. Recognition. Light. The way some people feel like home,
before you've even walked through the front door. It made him realize something. He wasn't just drawn to Evelyn because she was kind or beautiful. He was drawn to her because she reminded him.
Not until she looked at Caleb and thought, "This doesn't feel like falling. This feels like landing." Peace wasn't something she had ever associated with love before. She was used to love feeling urgent, demanding, dramatic. But Caleb brought stillness, not because he was perfect, but because he was present. In a world that kept racing, he stayed. They were sitting on the porch one afternoon, watching the sky change color. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, but neither of them were really paying attention to the world around them. It was the quiet between them that said the most. "I used to think love was supposed to be a spark," Evelyn said suddenly. "Now I think it's a breath, slow, steady, life-giving." Caleb looked at her with that calm softness he always had. "I think love is both," he said. "But what lasts? Breath always lasts longer than fire." They still hadn't put a label on what they were. No official "are we dating" conversation, no status updates, no rings, but everything between them had taken root, and the fruit was peace. One night, Evelyn had a rough day at work. A difficult client, a broken file, an email that left her doubting her worth. She didn't even tell Caleb. She just went straight home, curled up under a blanket, and closed her eyes. Half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. She opened it slowly. Caleb stood there holding 2 cups of tea and a bag of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. "I didn't know what happened today," he said gently, "but I felt like you might need comfort instead of conversation." She didn't speak. She just leaned into him, let herself be held, and felt her spirit exhale. Caleb never pressured her to open up. He just made it safe to do so. When she shared, he listened. When she didn't, he waited. And in that waiting, she found healing. Because finally, she had met someone who wasn't afraid of her silence. That week, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "This isn't loud. It's not fireworks. It's sunrise, soft, steady, inevitable. And my heart isn't racing. It's finally at peace." Across town, Caleb was writing too. "She doesn't fix everything. She just reminds me that everything doesn't need to be perfect for it to be good. I used to think love needed intensity, but now I know love needs intention." They began going to church together on Sundays, not because it was expected, but because it felt right. They didn't sit in the front. They didn't make a scene. They just sat together, hands sometimes touching, hearts fully open. And one Sunday, during worship, Evelyn closed her eyes and whispered quietly, "Thank you, God, for not giving me what I asked for, so you could give me what I didn't know I needed." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She wasn't sad. She was safe. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of something stronger. And what Evelyn and Caleb had now wasn't flashy, wasn't dramatic, wasn't storybook. It was sacred. One afternoon, while walking through the park, they passed an older couple sitting on a bench. Caleb smiled and said, "Think we'll be like that someday?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "No, we'll be better, because we didn't find each other. We waited for God to send us." They both paused. Then Caleb said quietly, "Can I say something strange?" "Always." "I think I loved your spirit before I ever heard your name." She smiled. "Not strange at all. I feel the same." That night, after parting ways, Evelyn stood on her balcony and looked up at the sky. Stars glittered like quiet promises. The wind carried a chill, but she didn't notice, because inside, everything was warm. She whispered a final prayer. "Lord, whatever this is, if it's from you, let it bloom, slowly, beautifully, in peace." Love had not come crashing into her life. It had drifted in gently, and she let it stay. Waiting is hard, but waiting with hope, that's even harder. Hope whispers when everything else is silent. It holds on when your grip is failing. It walks forward when your faith feels too tired to move. And somewhere along the journey, Evelyn had realized she was no longer just waiting for something. She had become the wait someone else had been praying for. Caleb was thinking the same thing. He stood at the window one night, looking out over the stillness of the street below. The wind pressed softly against the glass. He whispered under his breath, "God, I didn't know peace could look like a person. But she is. Not perfect, not flawless, but faithful and consistent and real in a world full of filters." They hadn't said, "I love you" yet, not because it wasn't there, but because some things are too holy to rush. And yet, love was everywhere between them. In the prayers they spoke before meals, in the hands they held while watching rain fall, in the quiet check-ins during long days, in the way Caleb remembered her mom's favorite flower, in the way Evelyn left handwritten notes on napkins tucked into his bag. But then came the wait, a different kind. Not the wait for connection, not the wait for clarity. This was the wait for confirmation. One Sunday, Caleb felt stirred during prayer, a strong tug in his heart that he couldn't ignore. He didn't hear a voice, but the message was clear. "It's time to ask me seriously. Is this your person, or is this just a preparation?" It shook him, because he wanted it to be her. But he had been wrong before. He didn't want to mistake comfort for calling, didn't want to label something God only intended to shape for a season. So he waited. He didn't bring it up to Evelyn right away. Instead, he went quiet for a few days. Not distant, just reflective. Evelyn noticed. She didn't panic, but she felt the shift. Old fears crept in. Was he pulling away? Was this where the story unraveled? But something deeper told her to stay still. That night, she sat in bed with her Bible and asked, "God, if this isn't forever, please don't let it turn into another heartbreak. But if it is, show us both in a way we can't deny." Caleb, that same night, went for a drive. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of tires on pavement and the thoughts swirling in his chest. He stopped at a lookout point just outside of town. Stars above him, questions inside him. And finally, he said out loud, "God, is this the one?" A breeze blew through the trees. Leaves rustled. And suddenly, a verse came to his heart. Not remembered, not recited, just present. Hope does not disappoint. Romans 5:5.
And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just a good thing. This was a God thing. Because every time he wanted to run, Evelyn made him want to stay. Not by pressure, by presence. Every moment with her had pulled him closer to the kind of man he always prayed to become. And isn't that what love is supposed to do? The next day, he saw her. She was sitting under a tree reading, hair tucked behind one ear, a soft look in her eyes. He walked up and sat beside her, quiet for a moment. Then finally said, "I asked God if you were the one." Evelyn looked up, heart pounding. And? He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small note, the one she had left him the week before. On it she had scribbled in blue ink, "God doesn't give halfway peace." He held it up and smiled.
Evelyn smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered back, "You're the answer that made the waiting worth it." The beauty of God's timing isn't in how fast it comes. It's in how full it feels when it finally arrives. Evelyn woke up that morning with a quiet in her spirit she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't silence. It was completion. Not the end of a chapter, the beginning of a covenant. She looked around her apartment, sunlight slipping across her kitchen floor, bird song humming in the background. There was no dramatic sign, no big heaven-opening moment, but everything felt aligned. Even her heartbeat sounded like worship. Across town, Caleb stood at the mirror adjusting his shirt collar. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. For the first time in his life, he wasn't overthinking what to say. He just wanted to be fully present for whatever God was unfolding next. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a small box, not flashy, not extravagant. Inside was a simple gold band. No diamond, no script, just clean, steady, meaningful, like their story. Later that afternoon, they met at their favorite park, the one with the wooden bench and the cherry blossom tree. The first time they met, everything was unspoken. Today, it was all about what could finally be said. Caleb took her hand gently. He said, "There's no script for this." "Good," Evelyn smiled. "I like when God writes it in real time." He dropped to one knee. No crowd, no photographer, no rehearsed speech. Just him and her, and the whisper of God between them. "I didn't fall in love with you. I walked into love with you. Slow, steady, on purpose. And if you'll have me, I'd like to keep walking all the way home." Evelyn didn't cry. Not at first. She just nodded, then laughed, then finally whispered, "Yes." Not because it's perfect, but because it's God planned. And I don't want perfect. I want proven, and you are. They didn't tell everyone right away. They waited a few days, not because they were hiding, but because they wanted to soak it in. Like the last page of a favorite book, before you close it, before the world gets to read it, you sit with it, let it breathe. When they finally announced it, the responses were what you'd expect. "So happy for you! Finally! What a perfect match!" But what most people didn't know was how long the journey had really been. Not just the journey to each other, but the journey within themselves. Because what God gives you when your soul is ready isn't just a person. It's a reflection of what He's healed in you. Evelyn had to walk through loneliness, self-doubt, and heartbreak to understand how to receive steady love. Caleb had to be broken down, rebuilt, and surrendered to finally know how to give it. And when the time came, they didn't meet at the surface. They met at the soul. Their wedding was small, under a canopy of trees with fairy lights and soft music. A few friends, some family, and the overwhelming presence of God. When they exchanged vows, neither of them used notes. They just spoke from that deep, sacred place where peace lives. Caleb said, "I vow to walk slow, to stay steady, to keep choosing you on quiet days, to pray for you when you're tired, and to never mistake comfort for complacency." Evelyn said, "I vow to never rush what God is growing, to honor the stillness that brought us together, and to remember that love isn't made in loud moments. It's made in consistent ones." When they were pronounced husband and wife, there was no roar of applause, just soft tears and a stillness so heavy with glory it felt like heaven had leaned in close. Later that night, as they sat together on their porch, hand in hand, Caleb said quietly, "Do you ever think about how none of this makes sense?" Evelyn leaned into his shoulder. "All the time. But maybe that's how you know it's God." The divine unveiling didn't come in a grand gesture. It came in peace. It came in timing. It came in the quiet arrival of everything they were always meant to have, but only when their souls were finally ready to hold it. Because what is yours, what God has written into your timeline, doesn't get lost, doesn't expire, doesn't get stolen by what you've been through. It just waits until your hands are open, until your heart is soft, until your spirit says, "Now I'm ready." And when it comes, you won't have to chase it. You won't have to convince it. You won't have to beg it to stay. You'll just know, because the one who's meant for you won't come to complete you. They'll come to walk beside what God already completed in you. As the stars bloomed above their porch, Evelyn whispered one final prayer. "God, thank you for not giving me what I wanted too soon. Thank you for making me ready. Because what you've given me now, it was always mine. I just had to grow into it." And that was the truth of it all. The wait wasn't wasted. The timing wasn't off. The delays weren't punishments. They were preparation. Because when your soul is ready, God will send what was always meant to be yours.